that's what I have here. This is the analyzer for analyzing the biofossils. This right here is a reinforced security chest with a key lock combination, all part of security craft. The only person who can open this up is me, and only I know the super secret code known only to me by my brain. So, I'm going to put in the secret code. Let me see if I can remember this thing here. Let's see. 1, 2, 3, and 4. Okay. Yep, nobody is ever going to suspect that. And here we have, bingo, Dino DNA. But basically speaking, I have these separated into 5 categories. Some of these, the 3 categories here are based on the time in which they came. Some of these are, these 2 categories right here are actually modern day animals, but they're separated from being vanilla to living fossils and whatnot. The only exception, the only animal that's out of place right here is Confuciacornis. It's actually a Cretaceous animal, but it's not necessarily a dinosaur, it's a bird. And yes, I know birds are dinosaurs, but I just don't feel like it fits in with the rest of them, because, I mean, I would have preferred to actually make a park and arrange the dinosaurs in alphabetical order. The Confuciacornis would have looked so small and so pathetic alongside the huge animals from the other Cretaceous period that I just really would have wasted an entire pen actually breeding these things. And they can fly, and they're little assholes, so they're going to fly away the moment that they hatch. So you better make sure that you basically put these things in an enclosure where with a ceiling, with a friggin' roof, because don't let them fly away. You'll never see them again. Basically speaking, I'm going to start out with the vanilla Minecraft mods. You have your cow DNA, you have your pig DNA, your sheep DNA. This is the Minecraft version before sheep dropped mutton, so sheep are basically half useless at this point. Chicken DNA, and of course my favorite, horse DNA. Anyone who knows me knows that I love Minecraft horses. Basically, horses are the one thing that I waited for so long in Minecraft, and I actually got so fascinated with horses that I actually built a kind of a business around finding and breeding horses in Minecraft. I just would travel miles and days on end until I would find a place that had a whole bunch of horses. I'd corral them, and I'd start breeding with them, and eventually I'd sell them. I had one server where I had so many horses, and I bred them specifically to where they were the best and healthiest, the fastest horses, the strongest horses, the ones that could jump highest, that people started paying me for them. So basically it's like, I'll give you so much gold or so much diamond for a good horse that is so strong, and I'll even throw in some extra for the saddle. So people literally started calling me the Horse Master, and somebody came by and tried to mess with my horses, tried to grief me, tried to kill them. Yeah, they weren't going to stay. They weren't going to be doing that for much longer. Basically, trawled them back to their secret lair and just basically TNT'd the shit out of them. But anyway, what's so great about it is that you can basically just genetically breed your own vanilla Minecraft mobs by basically taking DNA from them. You can basically get sheep by analyzing wool, I think, cow DNA from beef, pig, pork, chicken from chicken. It's all easy and all really just, it's really good. It's really good. Pretty much makes farming these animals really pointless now, because you can just inject one of these into a cow and not have to waste your wheat having to get two cows to multiply anymore. You can get twice as many cows as long as you have the appropriate number of embryos. Now, the thing about horses is, horses don't drop any meat. They do drop leather, however. Now, leather has the possibility of yielding cow DNA, but it also has a chance of yielding horse DNA. So there's a chance that you're going to get more cow DNA than horse, but I'm just so glad that that's a feature in this game. Anyway, the tour moves on. This is a hedonist. Now, the thing about it is, the hedonist is a Cretaceous animal, but it's not necessarily a dinosaur. I'm pretty sure it's a terrapin. It's a prehistoric turtle. I'm pretty sure it's from the Cretaceous period, but like I said, it's such a small animal that I don't think it would have fit in with the rest of the animals in this classification, because these things are some pretty impressive animals, and the hedonist just doesn't really come off as such. Sorry, hedonist, you kind of got forced out here, but hey, at least you're not the Confuciacornis, am I right? So here we have your living fossils. We have the sturgeon, we have the alligator gar, and we have the nautilus, but we also have the coelacanth. And I have coelacanth all the way over here because his DNA is like such a different looking form of DNA that I kind of wish the other living fossils had, but that's because he is the only one that's actually a fish. The other ones, they're actually technically part lizards or or basically snails. The nautilus is technically a kind of snail, and I'm pretty sure that alligator gar and sturgeon are actually closely more related to lizards than they are to fish. And it just brings me back so many fond memories of Jeremy Wade just on River Monsters trying to catch alligator gars, that supposed alligator gar that was like 20 feet long in the Florida Everglades. Jeremy Wade, you're my idol. I'm going to miss River Monsters so much, and I just hope you have as much success as you deserve in whatever you choose to do with the remainder of your life. I'm going to miss you terribly, Jeremy. Anyway, now we get to the stuff that you guys actually came here to see. I mean, now we're going to start talking about the classifications of the dinosaurs, but we also have rotten flesh here. Rotten flesh is one of the byproducts that analyzing DNA can result in, but it's actually good because rotten flesh has actually been made pretty useful in this mod, and I'm going to get to telling you why that is in just a moment. It's coming up next on the Animal Planets, the most extreme. You know, I missed that show. I really wish that Animal Planet would keep showing it. It was a fun show. But anyways, here we have at the top row the Jurassic period. And starting off in alphabetical order, we have Allosaurus. Now, the Allosaurus was a big contender in the Jurassic period. It was the apex predator of the Jurassic period. Most people say that Tyrannosaurus Rex is the king of dinosaurs, and he's definitely the king of Cretaceous, but Allosaurus is without a doubt the Jurassic prince of the dinosaurs. You do not want to mess with Allosaurus. Brachiosaurus, one of the most well-known dinosaurs in the entire world, the most well-known sauropod, the first dinosaur that we ever see in full in Jurassic Park. It's a beautiful herbivorous sauropod, and I just love this dinosaur to death. Like, the first time I saw it in Jurassic World, I thought, that is a real dinosaur right there. I mean, I know that you can basically see the CGI for what it is, but I think that after 20 years, it still holds up, and it's just beautiful. And the way and the majesty that they give this animal, depicting it with the music that accompanies it, that beautiful Jurassic Park music, it literally brings tears to my eyes. That is ultimately why I am doing this project, because of how much I love Jurassic Park. And of course, we are moving on. Ceratosaurus. Basically, this is a smaller Jurassic carnivore, smaller than Allosaurus, and it's distinctive for basically having a horn on its nose and 2 spikes on its eyelids. Basically speaking, this is actually kind of a cute-looking carnivore, but be careful, it's still going to eat you. It's a pretty big dinosaur, pretty much, I'd say roughly the size of a hippo. And we all know how dangerous hippopotamus can be. And if you're wondering if Ceratosaurus ever appeared in Jurassic Park, well, it actually did. It had a minor appearance in Jurassic Park 3, and it was in the scene where they'd been on the boat, they had just escaped the bird cage, and they hear the phone, and they think that the Spinosaurus is just around the corner, but then it turns out to just be mountains of Spinosaurus shit, and they stick their arms in it, they start digging around for the phone, and then a dinosaur shows up, and that's what the Ceratosaurus is. It basically checks them out, it sniffs them, and is like, ew, these people smell like shit, I'm gonna leave them alone. Anyway, that's just the only time it's shown up in Jurassic Park. It was included in Jurassic Park Operation Genesis because of that scene, and it's a pretty small carnivorous dinosaur. You might also remember it from the Asylum movie, Age of Dinosaurs. Age of Dinosaurs is basically the Asylum ripoff of Jurassic Park that they released in 2013 to cash in on the 20th anniversary of Jurassic Park and whatnot. For the longest time in that movie, the Ceratosaurus was actually the main antagonistic dinosaur in that movie, and it's depicted as being much larger than it actually is. They basically beefed it up to T-Rex size, and it was an interesting idea to give such a lesser-known dinosaur the spotlight. Instead of having T-Rex or Spinosaurus, you get one of the smaller ones, but what's the point of doing that if you're going to make it T-Rex sized anyway? Anyway, we move on. Here we have Compsognathus, and you probably remember these from the Lost World movie. Basically, the little chicken-sized dinosaurs that attack the little girl, and then they gang up on Dieter. Most people basically wonder why Dieter couldn't just fight them off. Well, the novel basically goes into an idea for why that is. Not saying that it's scientifically accurate, but according to the novel, compies kind of have a sort of a toxic bite to them, sort of like Komodo dragons. They don't necessarily make the enzyme that is the poison or the venom, but it's just because their mouths are so full of bacteria that this is what happens. And basically, when a compy bites its victim, it pretty much releases a kind of endorphin, somewhat, that pretty much makes the victim kind of tired, they just want to go to sleep. It basically makes it easier for the compies to pretty much take them down. And you can sort of see that happening to Dieter in the movie. You have his first initial attack by the compies. They're biting all over him. But as he's trying to get away from them, you see that he's getting more and more tired. He's moving more and more sluggishly. And the point where he falls in the river, instead of getting immediately back up, he just kind of lays there for a minute, and then the compies start jumping on him. And that's basically what I think is happening here, is that he's basically beginning to lose consciousness, as it were. But anyway, enough about the book. Let's talk about the compies in the game. You gotta be careful when you're breeding these for two reasons. One, these are pretty damn small bastards, and when they hatch, they're really small, and they don't get much bigger, and they're pretty hard to see. The colorations for both the feathers and non-feathered versions of these animals, they can easily be lost. So if you're going to breed these, don't breed them in an area with too much tall grass, because you're going to lose the little bastards. And anyway, the other problem is that I would literally say that for being such a small animal that is being depicted as being timid, according to the Dinopedia in this game, they are probably the second most vicious animals in this mod. And the reason I say that is they don't really compare with the bigger carnivores, but basically speaking, you were told that these things were supposed to be timid according to the mod's programming, and yet they are pretty damn vicious. They are assholes, actually. Basically speaking, according to what I've heard, is that if you breed too many of these things, you run the risk of being attacked and just ganged up on by all these little bastards. So if you're going to breed them, make sure that you have tamed them. Make sure that they have imprinted on you, that they identify with you as their owner, and that they are well fed. Because, I mean, you definitely don't want to get attacked by something that's so small that it could sneak up on you in the grass and just take you out without even you noticing or being prepared for it. But anyways, I said that they were the second ones because there's another dinosaur in this mod that's not technically a dinosaur, but it is without a doubt the bigger asshole of the two. Here we have Dilophosaurus. As I mentioned, this Dilophosaurus isn't going to spit venom, yeah. This mod was designed for scientific accuracy as much as it could. It wasn't designed with Jurassic Park in mind. In fact, usually whenever people who make requests of the makers of this mod to add more Jurassic Park exclusive content, they literally say, no, this isn't a Jurassic Park mod, it's a dinosaur mod. Like, stop asking us to add the Indominus Rex, we're not going to do it. Yeah, there's Jurassic Craft if you want that, but me personally, the reason why I'm choosing Fossil Archaeology is that Fossil Archaeology was the first dinosaur mod that I saw in Minecraft. For the longest time I wanted to play it, I just didn't know how to install it, and I didn't have a powerful enough machine to handle the mod, and for some reason, I just think that the aesthetic design of the dinosaurs in Fossil Archaeology they work better with Minecraft. I mean, you take a look at the models from Jurassic Craft, and they are so heavily detailed that you can tell that they don't belong in this game. With these animals, however, they sort of have a look that matches aesthetic design. Like, if you were traveling in the world and you didn't know you were playing a modded game and you happen to come across one of these things, they actually do look like something that you would expect to see in a Minecraft game. They're fully acceptable. You are willing to accept these things. But anyways, back to the Dilophosaurus. I mentioned how the tar slimes are basically compensating for the fact that these things can't spit venom, and they're also not going to have their frills. And I gotta say, I give a lot of a lot of respect for the Dilophosaurus in Jurassic Park, because that was the only part of the movie that legitimately scared me as a kid. I mean, my association with Jurassic Park was odd when I was a kid. When I was a kid, when I was like a little kid, the movie didn't scare me. But when I got older, there were scenes from the movie that actually did start to get to me when I started figuring things out a bit more. Like the idea that a dinosaur could possibly spit venom at you, and it's going to blind you. You're not going to be able to see it coming when it makes its attack and starts to eat you. That's kind of a terrifying thing. And more about that later, but I'm just rambling here now. That's the thing that you're going to have to accept when you watch my videos. I tend to ramble a bit. Anyways, Dilophosaurs aren't going to spit venom. They're not going to have their frills, but what they are going to have is that these ones are actually going to grow to full size. Yeah, the ones seen in the Jurassic Park movie were actually kind of tiny. It's been conflicting on whether or not these things are actually juvenile, or if the genetic tampering from the movies have actually made them grow smaller, and that might be a plausible explanation, but when these things are fully grown, they're 10 feet tall and nearly 20 feet long, yeah. And that's how they're depicted in the book. And honestly speaking, having read both the book and seen the movie, I can't tell which version of events is more terrifying. Anyways, much like the raptors, however, these are some of the few dinosaurs in the mod that can actually climb up the walls, so you gotta be careful about that. And knowing me, knowing how these animals behave, is that if these things are going to start to climb up the fences, they're basically just going to die. They're going to climb, they're going to get hurt, but it's not going to register for them that they are being hurt to the point where their lives are in danger, and they're just going to die. So I'm just going to have to make sure that I breed a lot of these. So did I mention to you guys that at some point in breeding in this game is that cultivating the DNA will eventually become irrelevant? My advice on that is just things are going to happen. Just let things happen the way they're going to happen. Just make sure you go out into the park and collect the eggs. Make sure that you know what you're doing. I'll get more on that later, but let's move on. Here's the Dryosaurus. It is a very small herbivorous dinosaur, 2-footed, and it's strange. I remember reading somewhere that it's somewhat debated on whether or not this animal first appeared in the late Triassic period or the early Jurassic. Now, the Triassic period is the period before the Jurassic, and so it's actually older, so who knows? This could be potentially one of the very first dinosaurs to ever evolve. But I don't know for sure. I'll have to look it up myself, but I'm just too lazy right now. I'm just trying to convey as much interesting information as I can. The Plesiosaurus. This is probably one of the more famous and well-known dinosaurs in the world, and the most tragic part about it is it's not a dinosaur at all. Yeah, this is a marine reptile, but it's also another reason why this is so famous is probably the biggest case of mistaken identity, or at least one of the biggest cases of mistaken identity in the history of modern-day culture. I think that another dinosaur deserves that specification, but I think this one is the only one that qualifies for the marine reptile world. Basically speaking, most people know what a plesiosaur is because it's believed that a plesiosaur is what the Loch Ness Monster is. And it's sad because the only reason that people have to believe that is basically all part of a hoax, a 70-year-old photograph that was revealed to have been a hoax when the person who actually took the photo died and confessed it on his deathbed. Yeah, the surgeon's photo is a fake. It's a Brachiosaurus toy attached to a submarine. But basically, the Plesiosaurus is one of the more famous marine reptiles from the prehistoric age. It has such a recognizable design, and, well, I gotta say, I bred one of these on a different map, and I gotta say, I'm a little bit disappointed, just the slightest bit, because I kind of like the way the older version of the mod had this animal, because they were much bigger, they grew much bigger, they moved and behaved differently, and you could actually ride them. I mean, ultimately speaking, that was more scientifically inaccurate, and this version is the more accurate of the two. Basically, a Plesiosaurus couldn't be the Loch Ness Monster because it can't raise its neck out of the water, and that's one of the things that I just kind of don't like about this version of the creature, because it actually doesn't grow that much bigger than sturgeon, and the thing about this animal is that it's pretty hard to feed because it's not going to hunt for fish on its own. Yeah, you're going to find out that the animals that exclusively eat fish are going to be like the hardest things to feed on this mod, because there are no vanilla fish just don't spawn as mobs in the Minecraft world, and it's not like these animals could just fish for them. It's not like these things are just going to drop into their feeding area and they'll just be able to eat them themselves. No, these things have to technically hunt for their food, but the problem is the Plesiosaurus is so small that it won't eat any sturgeon that is thrown into its pen. And the saddest thing about it is they're basically the same size as the sturgeon. So if you're asking, well, what do they eat, and why are there sturgeon in the pen there in the first place if they're not going to eat them? Well, here's the reason why, is that you can't actually feed a plesiosaur using fish spawn. Yeah, if you have enough sturgeon, nautilus, or alligator gar in one single pen, and if you've named them, you actually have to use a name tag on these things if you don't want them to despawn. If you have enough of them, they'll eventually start breeding, they'll start spawning, and they'll start dropping sturgeon spawn, alligator spawn, nautilus spawn, kind of like what I have down here in my inventory. This is a nautilus spawn. And basically speaking, the Plesiosaurus will seek that stuff out. It will hunt for it. I've seen it done to where it will swim in and just scoop them up from the bottom of the pen. So all you need to do is make sure you have enough sturgeons in there, you have them named with name tags, and just have a breeding population to where this animal can feed itself. So that's basically all I can really say about the Plesiosaurus, except for the fact that this one is clearly a Jurassic Plesiosaurus, when I'm pretty sure there was a Cretaceous variant of this animal as well, a much larger descendant. And when I say larger, I mean really large. I mean, that's probably the one that people think of whenever they imagine this animal, but it's definitely not this one. This one is kind of small. And finally, our last dinosaur in the Jurassic period, the world-famous Stegosaurus. One of the trickiest names of dinosaurs to pronounce, and yet 3-year-olds can do it, because that's just how much kids love dinosaurs. Stegosaurus is a pretty weird-looking dinosaur. Got a big, fat belly, a long, stiff tail, huge dorsal plates on its back, and nice, vicious, mean-looking spikes on the end of its tail. Basically, for impaling its enemies, just stabbing them into their throat and just letting them bleed to death. Although, interestingly speaking, it's been researched that dinosaurs don't have a centralized nervous system, so they actually don't necessarily bleed to death. They are very hard to kill. They're very slow bleeders, so even if you were to actually stab one in the jugular, it might take much longer to die than a mammal would. But anyways, I'm just going off on so many tangents here. Stegosaurus, it basically was... I think that Stegosaurus is important because it and other dinosaurs variants that are similar to Stegosaurus in the same family as it, they were the first indication that the herbivores were beginning to evolve specifically to fight back against the carnivores. Now, you could say that the sauropods, like Brachiosaurus, did the same by basically getting so much larger that the carnivores would choose to back down. They wouldn't try to take on something that big because they know they might get hurt. But basically speaking, not everything can just grow to be be super big. Other animals had to experiment with their defenses, and Stegosaurus was definitely one of the first contenders. It pretty much evolved itself to go toe-to-toe with Allosaurus, or maybe Allosaurus evolved to go toe-to-toe with it. That's the best part. You can't really tell which came first, can you? Anyway, moving on. Here we have the Cretaceous animals, starting off with Ankylosaurus. Basically, it's the armor-plated dinosaur with a nice thick shell on its back and a bony club at the end of its tail. It made a minor appearance in Jurassic Park 3, and you saw it again in Jurassic World, the scene where Gray and Zack are in the gyrospheres, and they see the 4 ankylosaurs right before the Indominus attacks. And I gotta say, that's a really interesting scene, because it shows how the Indominus was thinking. It was able to figure out cause and effect in that scene. It was able to adjust its strategy and use anything that it could in order to figure out how to kill this thing. Really interesting when you think about it. And Ankylosaurus is another one of the examples of the animals that just the herbivores that began to evolve specifically to fight back. Ankylosaurus boasted a big defense as well as an offense, so it basically covered itself in armored plating, but it also had that big lumbering bone club. Basically, with a proper swing of that thing, you could break an opponent's leg or the side of their jaw or their arm, basically just kind of cripple them in a bit to pretty much make them think twice about coming back. So that's Ankylosaurus, and the best part about it is like on my other map, the first dinosaur DNA that I ever cultivated was an Ankylosaurus DNA, and as such, I wanted to keep things in kind of like an alphabetical order, so I did a Cretaceous Park first. Ankylosaurus was the first dinosaur that I ever produced, and I just really love the Ankylosaurus. They're cute. Remember what I said about the aesthetic of this game versus Jurassic Craft? Well, the Ankylosauruses in this game are just so cute. You gotta love them, and that's why I'm playing this mod. That's why I've got a real soft spot for these dinosaurs. They're just so cool, and the best part about it is you can ride around on them, and they seemingly never get tired of that. And the best part about it is these things are basically all terrain. I'm not just talking about over land, but they are also aquatic even. You basically, when you're riding an Ankylosaurus, you can just ride it all across the land, and when you get to water, you don't have to get off and get into a boat. No, you can just drive your Ankylosaurus right into the water, and it's going to swim. It's going to stay on the surface. It's not going to be like a horse that dips underneath the water. You can cross oceans on these things. They are awesome. Anyway, the tour moves on. Here we have Deinonychus, and I gotta say that Deinonychus is one of my favorite dinosaurs in this mod, and probably in general, really, especially now that I know to respect Deinonychus as much as I have. You remember where I said that Plesiosaurus was a tragic case of misidentification that applied to the marine reptile world? Well, Deinonychus is probably the more tragic case of misidentification that applies to the dinosaur world. You see, Deinonychus is a subject of huge controversy because, well, I'm just going to say it, Deinonychus is the Velociraptor from Jurassic Park, and from all of its sequels. So, basically speaking, how did that happen? Well, Deinonychus is a raptor. It belongs to the raptor family, but in fact, it was actually the first raptor that was ever discovered, and so there wasn't the raptor classification to put it under. But once they started finding other specimens of raptors, other different species of raptors, and they realized that these animals are so similar that they do belong in the same family, the Deinonychus was reclassified as part of the raptor family. However, one of the more popular dinosaur classification books, they basically accidentally mislabeled Deinonychus under Velociraptor. And that was the book that Michael Crichton happened to find and base his research for Jurassic Park off of. And the saddest thing is that the novel actually references this about the fact that Deinonychus is so similar to velociraptors in a lot of ways that they've even been reclassified as one of the velociraptors. I'm pretty sure that's as close to the quote as I can get. So, this basically speaking, it was misidentified as being a velociraptor when really the two animals are different. And I'll get to why that is when we cover the velociraptors, but Deinonychus is such a cool animal. Basically, they are pretty much the size of a Minecraft person. They're pretty much the eye level with you, kind of like in the Jurassic Park movies. And both of the textures for these animals, both feathered and without feathers, they're very cool looking. And that's something that you kind of gotta hit and miss on this mod, is that sure, the feathers are scientifically inaccurate, but on some dinosaurs, they just make them look goofy, and you're better off turning them off. Deinonychus is one that I prefer to have the feathers off, but the feathers, once they reach adulthood, are really, really badass. I'm probably going to submit some screenshots to show you what these animals look like when they have their feathers on, and it's just really cool. I just really like the animal, and the best part about it is how loyal they can be when you are there when they hatch, if they are tamed to you. I actually began taking a group of my raptors out of their pen, making them follow me, going out into the wild, and intentionally getting attacked by hostile mobs just to see my Deinonychus squad take them down. So yeah, that is cool. These things will defend you if you're being attacked, and they will defend you even as babies, so that's how loyal these things are. They are expert pack hunters, and they also climb walls, which is probably going to be a problem when trying to keep them under control, but it's just something that I'm going to have to figure out. It's something that I'm going to have to do. But I definitely love them. I love these animals, and back on my other server, they're some of the oldest animals that I have. Why shouldn't they be? They were the second ones that I bred since I was going in alphabetical order. And the best part about it is, if when they die, they always drop a specific bone from their set, and I'll show you what that bone is later. It's definitely a souvenir that any Jurassic Park fan is going to want, and you'll find out why when we get there. Moving on, we have Gallimimus. These are the big ostrich-looking dinosaurs that were seen in the Jurassic Park that were stampeding with Grant, Lex, and Tim, and eventually get attacked by the T-Rex. And the thing about this mod is that I'm pretty sure that this is scientifically accurate, but the movie, it depicted them as not being that much bigger than Grant and them. Kind of like a little bit bigger than an ostrich. Ultimately speaking, if Steve is a to-scale model of what a human being is supposed to look like in the Minecraft world, then these animals, when fully grown, are huge. I mean, they are gigantic. And the thing about it is, despite how big they are, I don't think you can ride them. And I'm thinking, that's not right. I think it's because I think that the designers for the mod, they think that basically, sure, the Gallimimus is big, but it's not exactly sturdy. So any additional weight might slow it down or crush it. But I don't know. Gallimimus is still pretty cool. For the next 3 slots, we're going to be moving on to some marine reptiles. They're not necessarily dinosaurs. They're going to be reptiles or lizards. I'm not exactly sure which. I know that some of these are lizards, but others, not exactly sure about. But anyway, here we have Ichthyosaurus. Now, Ichthyosaurus isn't a dinosaur. It's a marine reptile, marine lizard, and it's probably one of the most important fossil finds in all of the fossil record, because basically speaking, if you've probably seen this fossil, if you have any sort of interest in paleontology, or if you like watching scientific debates and whatnot, this fossil basically is pretty much a reptile that kind of looks like a dolphin. It has the shape of a dolphin, but it's still a reptile, or a lizard, not quite sure. But anyway speaking, if any of you watch creationists debate like I do, and you get tired of hearing that creationists blindly claim that no transitional species were ever found in the history of the fossil record, yeah, they have. Ichthyosaurus is literally a transitional species, and not just the one ichthyosaurus, but the several variants of ichthyosaurs that we have found all throughout the fossil record show the transition between the species. So we have the evidence. Ichthyosaurus is our evidence that we have transitional species, and basically speaking, the creationists that continue to deny this, it's not even denial, it's just a lie. They are lying. They know that we have this stuff, but they can't ever admit that it is what we say that it is, because that goes against their narrative. And the problem is that their narrative is just so wrong that they still think that they're relevant in the world. But anyways, that's neither here nor there. I don't want to start rambling about these topics. I'm just trying to share interesting information that I've got. Now, the next two slots in this Cretaceous category are definitely some more impressive specimens. Both of these are lizards, and by God, they are some terrifying, terrible lizards. I guess you could say that they count as dinosaurs, but they are lizards. I mean, sure, dinosaur means terrible lizard, but they're not lizards. They're actually birds. That's what I love about dinosaurs. They don't fit into existing categories. That's like a line from the Jurassic Park novel. So you could basically pretty much confuse yourself trying to talk about this stuff when you don't have as high an education as you should. But that's just what interests me, and that's why I want to continue education in this field. But what colleges around here are going to provide field to study like that? But anyways, here we have Liopleurodon. Liopleurodon is a huge marine reptile. I'm pretty sure it grows up to 30 feet long, and it basically swims in the water to feast upon prey. And the thing about it is, I am willing to bet that the ocean in the Cretaceous period was actually the most dangerous and the most hostile ecosystem on the planet in all of history, that history has ever known. Prehistory, the most hostile environment that the planet has ever known. At least one that can support life. It's an ecosystem that can support life. But basically speaking, when in the oceans in the Cretaceous period, everything was getting bigger. And that was a time where you had literal sea monsters everywhere you go. I mean, for those of you who pretty much want some perspective on what I am saying, look up the animal Helioprion. It might also be under the category of Predator X, but Helioprion is pretty much the scientific name for it, and that is an animal that actually existed. You have to take a look at that animal and you're not going to believe that it's real at first, but it actually did exist. So, Liopleurodon, it was a pretty awesome looking animal. It was a very dangerous marine reptile. It was a fierce contender, but not even that could stand up to our next contendant. It is literally the apex predator of the Cretaceous oceans 65 million years ago. We have the Mosasaurus, lizard of the Meuse River. I'd say that Mosasaurus skeletons are actually pretty important to the fossil record as well, because it was hotly debated back hundreds of years ago about whether or not any extinct animals could ever possibly exist, because if God created all these animals, why would he create them just to go extinct? But ultimately speaking, that once they found this and realized that it didn't match any other animal that was alive during the day, that it couldn't possibly match any of them, then it ultimately could conclude that this was a species that had disappeared. They no longer existed. They went extinct, because when they found this thing, I mean, ultimately speaking, this is a lizard that is 40 feet long, the size of a Greyhound bus, with 6-foot-long jaws, with hook-like teeth on the top jaw and a double-hinged bottom jaw. This animal is designed to bite down on you. Its top teeth slice into you to keep you in place, and the double-hinged jaw down at the bottom is supposed to move backwards, dragging the bottom teeth through the victim's body, just slicing it up. making it easier for the huge animal to swallow. So basically speaking, when they found this thing, they found the skull 90 feet down in a Dutch quarry. They assumed that it was a crocodile, but this happened in Northern Europe, and there were no crocodiles in Northern Europe. And then when they found the rest of the fossil, they realized that this thing was as big as a whale. And so it couldn't have been a whale because it had too many reptilian features. So ultimately speaking, the Mosasaurus is a truly terrifying animal, and I'm so glad that it finally got used in Jurassic World. And I basically knew that because of the hype that was surrounding Mosasaurus, ever since, even before Jurassic World was announced, when I realized that it was going to be in this movie, I knew that it was going to take out the Indominus, because that's what they do. They ambush, they stick by the shores in order to ambush prey that is on the land, kind of like how a crocodile does, and they can fully do that. And so you basically know that something with a mouth this big, anything that's going to get on land isn't going to be able to get away. Now, the thing about it is, Mosasaurus was without a doubt the apex predator of the Cretaceous waterways. Tyrannosaurus rex is pretty much called the king of the dinosaurs. It was without a doubt the apex predator of North America, and it was an apex predator while on land. But when you think about it, Mosasaurus had an ecosystem that covered more than 79% of the planet back then, so it had a lot more options to move around in, and I'm pretty sure we found fossils of these guys all over the world. They could travel across seas, they were so big. And ultimately speaking, that just shows the dominance that these animals had. They went extinct, yeah, probably because their food sources dried up, and the KT extinction definitely changed the environment that they were living in, and they couldn't compensate. But ultimately speaking, this animal right here, it's actually good news for us that this creature is extinct, because if these things were still around today, we wouldn't be able to go anywhere near the ocean. At least maybe our ancestors wouldn't have, and without basically the technology for seafaring having increased the way it did, we wouldn't have the technology, the seafaring technology that we would have today to actually go into the water and face these things head on. I mean, think about like the earliest forms of man when they were starting to build canoes out of wood to travel between islands. Basically speaking, you can't miss something this big because it has to stick to the surface in order to breathe air. It's a lizard. It's a lung breather. Basically speaking, if you're in a canoe and something like this comes to the surface to breathe and it spots you, there's literally nothing that you can do to stop it. Hell, basically speaking, if you have those big ships like the Europeans use to travel across the Atlantic, or other ships anywhere, big friggin' boats, they're still going to get taken down by these things, because these things are dangerous. We would have found these things by now, and more importantly, they would have found us. These animals would have been taking more lives than sharks or even natural ocean disasters ever would. They would basically make the ocean uninhabitable for mankind. And that's ultimately why I just respect this animal so much, and it is definitely one of the creatures that I am kind of afraid of. I'm actually hesitant to breed one of these things. I mean, I'm going to have to, like, build some kind of special aquarium enclosure to actually hold this thing and make sure it's filled with plenty of sturgeon, because the Liopleurodon and Mosasaur will actually hunt and eat sturgeon in the water. I think they'll also eat squid, but they'll also eat you if you're in the water, so be careful about that. I definitely don't want them getting out into the ecosystem and destroying pretty much like tampering the ecosystem of the Minecraft world, so... But anyways, I'm just gushing. Now let's move on to some herbivorous animals. Here we have Pachycephalosaurus. Yep, this is a dinosaur that was featured in the Lost World Jurassic Park, both the novel and the movie. It's distinctive for having a dome skull that is made of 9 inches of solid bone, and what I find fascinating is that back during the time that the Lost World novel was written, a full skeleton of Pachycephalosaurus hadn't been found yet. And so the scientists, the paleontologists, could only speculate and hypothesize to what the dome skull was used for. the idea that it could be used for territorial displays, for dominance displays, or for defense, the idea that two competing males would actually butt heads with each other to try and, like, knock each other down, kind of like a bullfight in that way. And ultimately speaking, scientists didn't really know for sure if this was what they were actually used for or not, and I cannot help but wonder, it's like, well, sure, you don't know for sure, but you can at least state that that is a pretty strong hypothesis to presume that that's what it was used for, because you got a skull that's made of 9 inches of thick, solid bone, and the vertebrae on this animal are so properly aligned with the back, with the bottom of its skull, that this animal is basically built for absorbing impact. What else is it going to use a skull like that for? It's going to butt heads with rivals, and it's going to basically, it's going to attack, it's going to use that skull to basically ram any opponent that comes at it. The Pachycephalosaurus is literally a butt head. Here we have Parasaurolophus. Yep, they do have pretty long and hard names to pronounce, but I particularly don't find Pachycephalosaurus or Parasaurolophus particularly perplexing to pronounce. But then again, I did have a proclivity toward paleontology in my previous years. Anyways, Parasaurolophus is a pretty well-known and recognizable dinosaur for having that huge crest on the back of its head, a horn almost, and it's actually hollow, and it's connected to their nasal cavity. It's kind of like a big nose, almost. Pete Postlethwaite from The Lost World basically, like, nicknames one of the Parasaurolophus as Elvis because he doesn't know how to pronounce the word Parasaurolophus. And ultimately speaking, that it basically, he described the shape as being a pompadour. And the thing about it is that it's hypothesized that because these are connected to their nasal cavities, they could pass air through it. So I don't think that they used them as a snorkel so much as they did to pass sound through. Parasaurolophus ultimately had to pretty much be a very loud animal to signal the other members of its herd if there was danger coming. It had to send out a danger signal in order to alert the other members of its herd while they're eating or drinking or doing other things. Basically speaking, when it roars or when it bellows, it passes air through that crest on its head, and the sound travels through the crest and gets amplified, kind of like a horn. So, yeah, it really is a horn. Not much else to say about the Parasaurolophus is that, except in the mod, they are pretty big, and I just love them. They are big dinosaurs, you can ride around on them. They look kind of like big cows, almost. For some reason, I get such a cow vibe from Parasaurolophus, more than I do any other animal in the mod. It's kind of cute. And moving on to our next Cretaceous animal, it's not necessarily a dinosaur. In fact, it's not a dinosaur at all. It's a pteranodon. Pteranodons are basically a class of pterosaurs, flying reptiles, and you remember how I said that Compsognathus was the second biggest asshole mob in this mod? Well, that's because Pteranodon is actually the biggest asshole in this mod, because these things are supposed to be timid, but they are without a doubt the most vicious animals that this mod creates. So, ultimately speaking, they're supposed to be really passive, and they're supposed to be timid, because they're small animals. They're not going to try and fight bigger animals, because they're really small. They don't want to get themselves hurt by antagonizing something that's stronger than them. And that's ultimately why you can't fly on these things. I like the older version of the mod better, where they were a bit bigger and you could actually fly on one, just basically use one to, like a plane, to fly over the world with. But here they're smaller, more realistic, but they are definitely vicious. In fact, they are so territorial that they will literally attack any mob that comes close to their pen and close to their enclosure. I found that out the hard way when I walked too close to the glass pen that I was keeping them in, and I had a dog with me. The dog was following me, and one of the pteranodons was up against the glass, and it attacked the dog through the glass, just pecking at it, and the dog gets angry and tries to attack back, but the dog doesn't have the ability to attack through the glass, so it can't fight back, and the dog was eventually just pecked to death. So, you gotta pretty much mind these guys with special kind of temperament. You got to keep them isolated in a glass dome where they can't get to any other animals, because they will kill anything that moves. And if you don't keep them happy and don't keep them tamed to you, you're one of those things that they're going to attack. And here's one of the problems that I have with it. Keeping these bastards happy is a problem, because remember how I mentioned that all the fish-eating animals in this mod are probably going to be the hardest to feed? Well, Pteranodon is no exception, and here's why. There's a block in this mod called a feeder, and basically a feeder is a storage container that you can fill with either meat or plant matter, which will be ground up and pretty much used to feed the respective animals in the pen that you leave the feeder in, be it carnivores or herbivores, respectively. But basically speaking, the feeder can't take any fish. It can't take regular fish, it can't take cooked fish, can't take salmon, can't take mod fish. Basically speaking, it's not going to take any kind of fish, and it will take fish spawn eggs, but it'll just grind them up as a form of meat. And the thing about it is, the Pteranodons aren't programmed to seek out the feeders. They're not going to go toward the feeders, because I think they know that they just don't have anything for them. You can't put fish in there, so you're not going to have an easy means to feed these guys. So, ultimately speaking, you only have two options. You can either feed these animals by hand, feed them raw fish by hand, which is going to become a chore, no, a job in and of itself. It's basically going to suck up your entire life if you have too many of these things, because, like, you have to keep track of how hungry they are, and they get hungry pretty quickly. Or you could set up some kind of redstone-based dropping system to where you can get some dispensers, you could fill them to the brim with 64 stacks of fish, you could set up a redstone signal connected to a button, and if the animal walks over the button, gets close to the dropper or dispenser, it will shoot out a fish and they can eat that. And I actually did that, and it did work, and I had like 4 of these things set up with 9 64 stacks of fish in each dropper, and they were all set up to a button. But the thing about it is, these animals are such assholes that they'll sometimes congregate around the button, and they will keep walking over it and keep pressing it, and they'll just continue to eat their fill. And when they get full, they don't stop. They don't go away from the button. They just keep walking over the button over and over and over again, and they don't eat the fish that it drops because they're full. So they're wasting fish right there. The fish that they bring out of the dispenser is just gonna sit there in drop form, pickup form, until it eventually despawns from the world. And that's gonna be a problem, because collecting fish, not an easy thing to do unless you're going to cheat yourself. So I don't want to cheat myself, I don't want to do anything cheating worthy, but it's something that's going to happen. It's just going to be so tedious. And the thing about it is, they're going to need a lot of space. I tried this in a very small pen, and I could tell that the animals were bored because the pen was big enough to fly around in, but they couldn't really go anywhere. The dome that I'm going to build on this world, on this map, is going to be huge. There isn't going to be a place where I can set up any kind of feeding system that each one of them is going to know to go to, because, basically speaking, they're going to be so far spread out that they're just going to, I think, keep to themselves most of the time. And then, like, it'll be up to me to go in there and hand feed them, but at that point, they're going to be so upset with me that they're going to try to kill me. Fun! And that's all I can say about these bastard birds. Well, they're not birds. I know that people are pretty anal about that. I can find that kind of ironic. Dinosaurs are birds. Pterosaurs are not birds. That's pretty much the kind of argument that really confuses the people that don't know what they're talking about. Anyway, we're moving on to the final stretch of our Cretaceous period. We get to see some of the bigger animals now. We've got Sarcosuchus, the biggest crocodile who ever lived. I'm more partial to the Deinosuchus myself, but that's because it has a more traditional crocodilian features. It looks more like a regular crocodile from these days, except, well, bigger. No offense to Sarcosuchus, but I think that its jaws are just too long and too narrow that they kind of look silly. Basically speaking, this animal is kind of cool. I haven't had the chance to breed one in a game yet. I was building a pen for one quite a while ago, but I don't think I'm really going to play on that map anymore now that I have this map. That's the thing about Minecraft, you just move on. But anyways, they have some pretty cool animations. They will, whenever they sleep, they'll climb out onto the land and they'll sleep with their mouths open, kind of like how real crocodiles do. You can see like sleeping crocodiles with birds pretty much getting into their mouths to pick out pieces of flesh that might be caught between them and whatnot. That's what the Sarcosuchus is going to do. But also, the Sarcosuchus has a pretty cool death animation, to where when it grabs its prey in its mouth, it will actually begin spitting itself like a regular crocodile would, basically just breaking all the bones in its victim's body and tearing it up and making it easier to eat. I thought that was a cool case. It's not going to be cool if you yourself are caught in its jaws, because then your Minecraft world is just going to spin all over the place. It's like you're going to be caught in a dryer, so avoid at all costs. Here we have the Spinosaurus, the usurper. Basically, Spinosaurus is famous thanks to its role in Jurassic Park 3, but frankly, I think it's got a reputation that it doesn't really deserve, and I'll go into why that is. I mean, yeah, it's a dinosaur, it's a carnivore that's bigger than Tyrannosaurus, and there actually were quite a few carnivores that were bigger than Tyrannosaurus, but that's ultimately not why you're still not going to replace Tyrannosaurus Rex, because Tyrannosaurus Rex has such name power and stay power that it's just not going to go away. You can't replace T-Rex. Everybody loves T-Rex. It's the most well-known dinosaur in all of the planet. So, but the thing about Spinosaurus is, even in Jurassic Park 3, I don't think that it would have won the fight with Tyrannosaurus Rex, because the thing about it is, Spinosaurus might be big on land, but land is only half of its life. It's designed to basically spend half of its life on land and half of its life in the water, basically kind of like a combination between a duck and a crocodile. So yeah, this is the fabled crocoduck that creationists said that evolutionists would never find, so take that, creationists. But anyways, ultimately speaking, the Spinosaurus is a big animal on land, but that's because it had to be big, because its environment is actually in the water, where it actually ain't that big, where it actually is not all that much of a big fish. Sure, it's the size of a whale, but it had to be that big, because it's up against some pretty steep competition. And the thing about it is that you can tell by Spinosaurus's design, its elongated crocodile-like snout, that's basically for dipping into the water and spearing prey in order to bring out, in order to quickly get. So that's basically kind of like a heron. That's how a heron hunts. Dips its head underwater, spears something with its very long snout, and just lifts it up out of the water and eats it. So I don't think that it was all that much of a fighter on land, and the simple fact is, pound for pound, size does not immediately equal ferocity, so they were working under a lot of assumptions when making their Spinosaurus with that movie, and I don't know. I just don't think that it really deserves the reputation that it got from Jurassic Park 3, and thankfully it doesn't seem to have replaced T-Rex, and everybody still loves T-Rex. They don't think that Spinosaurus is all that great, so that's good. I just didn't want it to replace good old Rexy. And here we have Therizinosaurus. Therizinosaurus is one of the last herbivores that we have on this little tour. Therizinosaurus is a pretty interesting dinosaur. It's pretty big, and at the first sight of it, you would assume that it is a carnivore, kind of like a terror bird in that regard, but it's actually not. It's actually a herbivore. Therizinosaurus means scythe lizard, and that's because each of its hands end in very long, sharp claws that are kind of looking like scythes. So this is an animal that definitely looks cool. I highly recommend leaving the feathers on for this one, because it just has that aesthetic design, and so just make sure you feed it plant matter. It's not going to eat any meat, so don't waste your meat. Here we have the final herbivore on our dinosaur tour, the most famous herbivorous dinosaur in the history of the world, Triceratops, three-horned face. Triceratops is an iconic, well-known dinosaur and actually has the leading world record for the largest skull in the fossil record. And that's basically because it has this huge shield-like frill on the back of its head, leading to two 3-foot-long impaling spikes on the front of its face. And this is an animal that is really dangerous to contend with. Use caution. It is a favorite of Steven Spielberg. In fact, in the novel, when they are going over the sick dinosaur scene, that dinosaur was actually supposed to be a Stegosaurus, but Spielberg requested that they change it to a Triceratops because Triceratops was his favorite dinosaur. So he wanted to see a Triceratops in this movie, and that's kind of cool. The Triceratops scene is pretty interesting. I just wish that they had left the entire scene in instead of cutting so much of it out, because when you get down to the movie, the way that the final cut is chopped up, you realize that scene ultimately served no purpose. But anyways, Triceratops has come under some controversy lately, and it just goes to show how interesting science is. Science doesn't claim to be infallible. Science is capable of making mistakes, but more often than not, science will correct the mistakes that it's made. For example, a while ago, Triceratops came under some controversy as a paleontologist asserted the idea that Triceratops actually was just the juvenile form of a different animal called the Torosaurus. Now, the Torosaurus is very similar to Triceratops. It does have the big shield-like frill on the back of its head, and it does have a 3-horned face, so you can see that they look similar in appearance. But they are different animals, and that's why I'm certain that they are different animals, that Triceratops can't be the adolescent form of Torosaurus, for 2 reasons, actually. The reason number 1 is when you look at their distinctive skulls, Triceratops has the spikes that line the back of their shield-like frill, and I feel like the spikes are meant to be a natural defense against predators, because when you think about it, sure, the shield is going to protect the animal to prevent the carnivore from going directly to the neck, but then you have this big, large, obtrusive part of the animal's skull that the carnivore could easily bite down on the back of and pretty much use to manipulate the animal to get it to go where it wants them to go. And basically speaking, I feel like the spikes along the back of the Triceratops' frill discourage carnivores from trying to do that, because if they bite down on it, they're going to get their mouths cut. But that's reason number 1, because I don't think that you would lose a natural defense like that from going from your adolescent stage to your adult stage. But that's just reason number 1. Reason number 2 is that the smallest full-size skeleton of Triceratops that we have on record is actually larger than the fully grown Torosaurus skeletons that we've had on record. So basically speaking, we know that the Torosauruses that we have are fully grown, and the smallest Triceratops is still larger than they are. And that's why I ultimately can't believe this theory that they're the same animal, because the Torosaurus, it's just too small to actually be an adult Triceratops. Or Triceratops is just too big to be an adolescent Torosaurus. I mean, why would an animal get so big in its adolescent stage only to become smaller when it reaches adulthood? To me, that just doesn't make any sense. Especially since in the Cretaceous period, size really does matter. I mean, Triceratops is pretty much one of those herbivores that evolved to basically fight back against the carnivores. Instead of Ankylosaurus, which boasted a strong defense, Triceratops boasted both defense and offense. They literally went toe-to-toe with the next animal in our list, the most famous and well-known dinosaur the world over, the king of the dinosaurs. I give you Tyrannosaurus Rex, the tyrant lizard king. I look forward to breeding this animal. It's really only a matter of time until I do so, but I have to be hesitant. I have to be careful with how to do it, because with the other dinosaurs in the mod, some of them you can tame from birth. Not Tyrannosaurus, not Sarcosuchus, not Spinosaurus, and definitely not Mosasaurus or Liopleurodon. So you have to be careful in regarding these things. Give them the respect that they deserve. And I gotta tell you that standing still isn't gonna save me from this animal. Really isn't much more I can say about Tyrannosaurus, but it might not be necessarily be the biggest and most powerful dinosaur in the fossil record anymore, but in my mind, it's still the king of the dinosaurs. And even if people don't believe that, you can't deny that it's the undisputed king of North America. And here we come to the final dinosaur, our last but certainly not least, one of the most famous and well-known dinosaurs in popular media with respect to Tyrannosaurus and Triceratops, the Velociraptor, the speedy thief. Now, I mentioned before the controversy surrounding Velociraptor and Deinonychus. The reason why is that the mistaking identities is so drastic and so jarring is the fact that Velociraptor mongoliensis is actually pretty small. Yeah, most people who hear about this is what velociraptors really are, they are pretty disappointed because you're breaking a lot of illusions by telling people this, but velociraptors were only about 3 feet tall, they were feathered, and apparently they didn't have wrist bones. Yeah, they didn't have the joints in their wrist. I think this is the point in evolution where, because they were so bird-like, they were getting to be more avian. Their 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 wrists, their hands, were beginning to fuse into their arms, and so it would only be a matter of time before the next generation or so would see that their fingers and their claws were beginning to fuse together in order to become a bird's wing. But the Velociraptor is a very important dinosaur in the fossil record because I think it shows just how much our scientific research goes to show that dinosaurs are in fact avian, that they are in fact avian in nature, because some of the first fossils of Velociraptor that we found is pretty much how we got the name Speedy Thief. Basically, the Velociraptor fossil was shown to be on top of a nest of dinosaur eggs, and it was assumed that dinosaurs didn't sit on their eggs because it was believed that they would be lizards. They would most likely bury their eggs or just try to regulate their temperature otherwise, but they wouldn't have the body temperature to regulate their eggs themselves, so sitting on them would be pointless, and they also might crush them. And so we had a fossil of a dead velociraptor standing on top of a nest of eggs, and people begun to think that, I'm betting that this animal was oviparous. It probably ate the eggs of other dinosaurs because certain other birds and reptiles do that. So it's theorized that this animal was actually in the process of stealing the eggs from someone else's nest and preparing to eat them when it died. So that's where the idea that Velociraptor was a thief came in. It was supposed to quickly run into the nests of other animals and steal their eggs and eat them and get away, but that's actually not what later evidence begun to show. Ultimately speaking, you would notice in the fossil that the animal's arms are draped out over the eggs, and they're kind of protecting the eggs in some way, some similar fashion. And why is it trying to protect the eggs from the elements when it does not have the ability to shield them? Its arms are pretty thin and pretty spindly. How is it shielding the eggs if its arms are draped over them like that? It's not possible. This wouldn't keep the eggs warm. It wouldn't be protecting them, unless you consider the fact that this animal had feathers. Because when you look at the fossil, you'll realize that the animal is actually standing in the center of the nest, and the eggs are arranged around the animal's feet. It's basically kind of squatting, sitting as comfortably as it can, with its arms draped out over the eggs as much as possible. And unless this animal has feathers, this position doesn't make any sense. The only way that this makes sense is that this animal is shielding its nest of eggs with arms that are covered in such plumage of brilliant feathers. The feathers are what are keeping the eggs warm. They're protecting it from the elements. And so that just basically goes to show how science changes, how our opinions of these animals change, because this fossil, when it was first found, painted the notion that velociraptors were just quick little thieves that stole the babies, the unborn children of other animals. But in fact, this was actually the fossil of a good mother velociraptor who died trying to shield her unborn babies from the elements. And the best part about it is closer examination of the fossil reveals I would say the follicles, the notches, or the notches in the bones where the feathers would be anchored. So yeah, it's conclusively been proven that velociraptors did have feathers. In fact, a lot of dinosaurs are confirmed now to have feathers. And sure, that might destroy a lot of illusions for a lot of people. I personally fully accept the fact that dinosaurs were avian and they had feathers, but I will prefer the classic look of Jurassic Park without having feathers, because that's what I grew up with, and that's ultimately what I would want to go to Jurassic Park to see. If there were if a new dinosaur movie franchise were to establish itself to try and use feathered dinosaurs as accurately as possible, then that's another thing. That's something that they would do, and I would give it a look, and I would praise it for being scientifically accurate. But I think on this level, I'm probably going to mix and match whatever dinosaurs keep their feathers and what don't, because they give you the option to do that in this mod. It ultimately depends on what I think works and what I think doesn't, so... But anyways, that's our Velociraptor. And despite the fact that it's smaller than what I'd like, I still love the Velociraptors in this mod, and just like the Deinonychus, I look forward to breeding these things and having my own raptor squad going around with me. I look forward to it. I just hope I can keep them off the fences. So, those are all of our dinosaurs. Now I'm just going to go through the Ice Age animals as quickly as I can, because I don't really know much about them. Here we have the dodos. Here we have Elasmotherium. We have Gastornis. Forus. Okay, so they're not all easy to pronounce. I mean, seriously, somebody down in the comments section, tell me how to pronounce that phonetically, or send me. I'll just go look up how I'm supposed to pronounce this. We have our mammoth, we have our woolly mammoth, and the best part about the mammoth is that it sort of works like a sheep. You can actually shear the mammoths for their wool, except it's going to be brown wool, and like, I don't know what you use brown wool for, if you want a whole lot of brown carpet, maybe, but... We have our big birds, we have our Pelican, we have a Quagga, we have a Smilodon, and we have our Titanus, and I'm pretty sure Titanus is the terror bird. Now, I'm just going to take a moment to talk about the Quagga here, because the Quagga is a very important prehistoric animal. It's basically the prehistoric ancestors of what would eventually be horses. It's pretty much a prehistoric horse, and the reason why I say it's important is that, I'm just going to come out and say it, Jurassic Park probably would not have happened without the Quagga. Jurassic Park the novel would never be written, and thus Jurassic Park the movie would never be made, and thus the imperialistic franchise that is Jurassic Park would have never come to fruition. So, and the world would be a much, much sadder place. That is not a world I would want to live in. I cannot live in this world without Jurassic Park, man. Anyways, the reason that the Quagga is so important to Jurassic Park is that when a Quagga fossil was found, some geneticists were actually able to extract the DNA of the Quagga from the fossil and found that the DNA was still alive, it was still viable, and there was enough DNA to where the geneticists began to postulate the idea of actually cloning the Quagga from its DNA and actually bringing the Quagga back to life in our modern day so that we could study it. And so, that pretty much set the genetic research community abuzz with the potential gold mine that they found on with this idea, because if we could bring a Quagga back to life, what else could we bring back to life? We could bring the dodo back to life. We could bring a saber-toothed tiger back to life, the woolly mammoth, and then eventually, even a dinosaur. And thus, that is literally the idea of where Jurassic Park came from. And it's all thanks to the Quagga. I look forward to breeding the Quagga on my game. I look forward to using the Quagga, an awesome prehistoric horse. Anyways,